us in the Hive Nest to thrive and be your best, and to live and raise our kids up unto the freedom with which we've been blessed. Hive Nest Homeschool with Her Majesty Queen Bee and your Uncle Owl. Welcome to Hive Nest episode 6. Today we'll be talking about the Socratic Approach. Which one of you guys would like to go first?
Your Majesty, you want this one?
I will defer to you, Uncle Owl.
I knew it. All right, yeah. The Socratic Approach. Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and it may take some explaining because it's going to sound like, hey, everybody, this is what you should do when you're homeschooling, like as if like it is a curriculum. When actually it's not. This is mostly a way of thinking, a way of looking at the situation for raising children and their education. And so you can put your clipboards down. You don't need to take notes. I would even recommend maybe just listening and letting some of these things that we're going to say just wash over you and just, chew on them and think about it. Chewing on it and thinking about it is going to become a theme actually throughout this discussion because I'd like to give a quick history of why I think this way. And it was I've read Plato's Republic since I was pretty young. I think the first time I read it, I was maybe 12 or 13. And then we studied it a little bit in high school, and I read it again. And I've read it maybe 3 or 4 times since then. But after I was in college for a decade and a half plus, and I was a substitute teacher, and I was a teacher for years. And then I woke up while I was a teacher one year. I was teaching 7th grade. I was teaching science. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there's this portion of Plato's Republic in the beginning, maybe part 1, where Socrates is chatting with some of his friends, and there's just about it's maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs, maybe 2 pages, where they're going back and forth. They're asking questions, and he's just basically unpacking what he sees as like the most important things to be thinking about and worrying about for children's a successful education. One of them is a quote that most people know. He says, let the earliest education be a form of amusement, so that the child you can learn the child's natural bent. And we'll talk about what that means. But it was just lines like that. It's not like he tells you what to do. It's not like a perfect curriculum. Nothing we're going to say is going to be like, this is how you have to do it. This is week 1. This is month 1. This is year 1. It's not like that. It really is about, what are you thinking about? What are you watching? What are you evaluating? What's the bullseye for each of the stages of development for a child, for a school-age child? It starts somewhere around maybe age 4 or 5. You can use this for some of the earlier stuff, but mostly it's between about ages 4 till about ages 16 to 18. And why it struck me so intensely was I woke up in the middle of the night. I went and read these 2 pages, and I realized that after all the time I'd spent in education and all the people I'd read and listened to, and I mean contemporary, and people that I worked with who I love them all. They were great people, principals and administration and other teachers. But I realized that in those 2 pages of Socrates back and forth with his friends in Plato's Republic, there was more wisdom in those 2 pages than I had ever heard from anyone in any staff meeting or conference or anything like that. And there were some really wonderful people that I worked with. And I'm including myself. Like, I hadn't seen this exactly either, but it just hit me that this was really the right way to think. And so I began to develop it. Myself, I mean, it's not unknown to people because I don't want to say it's a repackaging of the way some things already work. So you'll find that throughout this discussion, I'm going to be referencing Jean Piaget and his stages of childhood development, Erikson's psychosocial stages, and the cognitive stages of what children will be able to handle. But again, like I said, I think just thinking this way and looking at your children and the success of their schooling, your homeschooling, this way is so much more beneficial than thinking that they need to know certain disciplines, like they need to be good at math, they need to be good at science, they need to be good at reading. That's all true, but understanding the developmental stages of the child is actually more important.
Okay, so it's basically like a different way of looking at how you are educating.
Yes, it's a different bullseye. It's like, what's the goal here? Is the goal to finish the worksheet? Is the goal to be able to do math? Maybe in the long run, it's to be very good at math, especially if they want to be an engineer. But like right now, today, or this week, or this summer, or this season, this year with my child, and my child's, let's just say your child is 8, like by the end of 8, what am I looking for? And I would just defy anyone to prove to me that what we're about to say as what you should be looking for is less important than a worksheet. I mean, I know that sounds silly, but that's the way most people think when they think of I need to be homeschooling, so I need curriculum and I need worksheets for my kids. And I would say that that's the wrong direction. You don't need that many worksheets. And the proof that your 8-year-old is doing well with their academics or with their quote schooling or with their developing is not going to be based on worksheets. It's going to be based on some other things that are way cooler than that. And I think most people will know this, like once we discuss it. I don't think this will be unknown to people.
Okay, so I think the best approach from here is to go into like what are the benefits of the Socratic approach versus like other traditional methods.
And for that, I would say simply, and Her Majesty can back me up, it's not a method. It's not a specific curriculum. It's not a way to do things. It really is a way of thinking. It is what do you want to call it? Your Majesty, how would you put it?
It's a worldview. It's yeah, a way of thinking. It's a reframing of how you think of education. More like a lifestyle. So regarding the way you put things, I'd like to add some things.
Great.
In biblically, I think it's in Deuteronomy, it says, teach these things while you're walking along the way. I'm not sure the exact, I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically teaching kids as you go about life. And there's another one that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. And if you dig into that verse, it's according to their bent. So it's an interesting way of thinking that and not only Greek but Hebrew in its way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfect. I really believe that what's going on here with the Socratic approach and what Socrates was talking about at the time is like as if you're watching these children. So even when I was a teacher, but now, if you're talking about your own children, it is what am I doing? And the answer is 90+% of the time that you're doing anything with your children, it doesn't have anything to do with school. And the tiny amount that it has anything to do with academic stuff, especially when they're age 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's like, what is it? 30 minutes a day max? It's more like 30 minutes a week. What would you say, Queen Bee?
Yeah, it's not a whole lot of time. I think most states mandate like 4 hours a day, 4 days a week or something, and you can get I think it's a lot more and a lot less because it's a lot more because you're constantly talking to your kids and interacting with them, especially while they're at home. But it's like formally, I mean, I don't know that you have to do a whole lot of it, but it's probably closer to half an hour a week if they're 4 years old.
Yeah. My brother and I like to use this as examples because I was a terrible student, a brilliant underachiever, and he was valedictorian, first in his class. And we both agree that this is probably being kind, but I think you do about 30 minutes of actual work a week in school, at least before maybe ninth grade. There's just not much. There's just not much to actually do. There's other things that are going on with human children up until the time that they need to be, able to do serious academics. And so what does that look like? I think I'll pick up from there. Unless you want to say something else, I'm going to dive in.
No, go for it.
All right, here we go. The first thing we'll do is I will give you stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'll give you the ages, and then we'll unpack that. The first age is basically 0 to age 8. I personally like to call it age 4 to 8. So first stage is up to age 8. Then stage 2 is around 8 to 12. So it might be 6 or 7 for some kids. It might be 8, 9 for other kids. That's okay. But by age 12 or 13, it should be transitioning to the next stage. So by the way, that's like kindergarten through third-ish to third to sixth grade-ish. I'll use those federal penitentiary markers just to help people. But even though you probably all agree that kids have ages, not grades. And then stage 3 is from about age 10 until about age 15. So again, some kids, I would say, especially girls, it might be 8, 9, 10. And then it might transition from 12, 13, 14. But by 15, it should definitely be changing pretty much for most kids. So the third stage is something like sixth grade to about ninth grade. And then stage four. Stage four is, I personally think it's around age 11 to age 18. So age 12 to 18. Now that sounds like sixth grade to 12th grade, and that's right. That's right. Because for some kids, it will start around the age 12, and for other kids, it may take till age 14 or 15. And that's okay. So that's the stages. So if you just boil it down to by fours, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 16, and then plus. And so here's what you want to be thinking. The first stage is the development of character and the most basic numeracy and literacy. So I can use numbers, I can add a few things, have them memorize the times tables, fine, who cares? Simple, basic operations with math. If you're doing that well from ages 4 to 8, you need about 15 minutes a week max. And by the end of age 4 to 8, with very little prompting on learning how to do, addition and subtraction, the basic stuff, and start with using the math in their normal life. So, their toys and their pieces of fruit, and when you go to the grocery store, stuff like that. And then basic literacy, which we did, everyone should go back and listen to it. We'll probably discuss it some more. You teach them the sound of the letters first before you teach them the name of the letters. And you just build their ability to recognize how to say a sound when they see the letter, and then they start building how to read. You do not need to dig into having them read longer and bigger stuff. Guess what? Every year that your child is able to look at a word or in a book, they will want to read things that develop and get bigger. I mean, my daughter right now, she's 5.5, and she just said that the book she took to show off with her friends that she wanted to show everybody was her favorite book. She was like, yeah, but it's a baby book. I mean, she's 5, and she already recognizes that she loves this Dr. Seuss book, and it's like a, quote, baby book, because she can read much more sophisticated books than that. And look, we didn't have to train her that. We didn't have to tell her, oh, by the way, that's third grade curriculum, but that's pretty much what she's reading. She's reading it at like a second or third grade level. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so, but that's not what you're watching. Mostly what you're watching is the development of their character. So play, games, getting along, doing their chores, doing what's asked, having a good attitude, losing, sharing, be respectful. You got any others? You want to throw in some?
I think you covered everything. Nothing
Well,
comes to mind.
it's fine. Good.
Would you put honesty into one of those
Good.
character
Yeah,
categories?
for sure. That's a big one. As they're developing, they do learn how to lie, like when they discover that their thoughts are their own. And at that point they start to lie. And so yeah, honesty is definitely a big one.
I didn't even put that in here, but that rhymes with the 3 that I wanted to say, because the last thing that I think is important to be taking seriously at this age is to give them stories that help develop their moral character. And that would play into exactly probably the most basic one of all of those at this age is going to be honesty. And so my 3 words are numeracy, literacy, and fantasy. And the fantasy is like a moral framework, stories that highlight very obvious and very healthy morals that the child can get behind and understand. And then I would honestly just add honesty. I think that's perfect. If you were to think of this stage as you're watching for their basic numeracy, basic literacy, but that takes like 3 to 5% of the time. 95% of the time, you're working on their moral character. You're working on their ability to get along with others. So at this point, you're not really, quote, teaching them about academics. At this point, you're teaching them about how to be a good person at a level that they can understand. And what Socrates describes, it doesn't even quite touch this point, because to him, these young kids shouldn't even be in school. I don't know if anyone wants to accept what I just said. What he was getting at was, these are for people who actually are students. And I don't know if Queen Bee would agree with me, but I think of thinking of a 6-year-old as like a student in a rigorous, an academic program of education is actually kind of silly.
I totally agree with you. And back in the day, they didn't start kids in school until how old was it, Uncle Owl? Maybe like
10,
12?
11, 12? Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And that actually maps on to what I call my third stage, which is the first stage where we will actually discuss things that sound like you're doing school or taking education seriously. But yes, I think that's right. So one thing to realize is that the first stage of the Socratic approach, as far as I'm concerned, is in the realm of preschool. And I don't mean 4-year-olds. They might be 9. They might be 7. They might be 8. That's okay. Because up to this point, you are not dealing with a child that can understand the depths of math or the depths of literature or the depths of philosophy or science or anything like that. All you're doing with any of those things is just exposure. Now, I'm about to throw out some big names, and Queen Bee knows a bunch of them, so you just pop in whenever you want to say something. But Piaget says that at this level, basically, they can handle the understanding of the movements of their body. They have some sensory motor perception. They can recognize when someone has a certain emotion. They can understand what it means when something's falling, and at this age, someone falling over, a big loud sound is enough to completely distract them, completely make them focus on just that one thing because their system isn't thinking deeply. They're not in their inner voice, if you want to call it that. They're not in there, trying to understand, what a convertible debenture in economics and finance is. They're not thinking about that. They can't. They are only thinking about how are the people around them. And that sensory motor experience is why how you are as a parent around them is really what they're learning. You're inculcating your humanity into your children. And that is 90+% of what they're, quote, learning. And so that's not a curriculum. That's not a school subject. That's not a discipline. That's not something that they're going to do for the rest of their life as a job. That's who they're going to be for the rest of their life as a person.
And conversely, if they are of age to learn that kind of thing and they are learning from a bunch of rowdy 7-year-olds just like them, what are they actually learning? Are they learning how to behave in a particular situation, or are they just going with the crowd?
And that is what Erickson discusses, which we haven't gotten into the depths of it yet, which we will at some point. But Erickson, so plus Piaget plus Socrates, Erickson at this point is saying these 6-year-olds, these 4-year-olds, these 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds, mostly they're understanding who they can trust and who they should not trust. They're understanding a certain amount of ability and autonomy to do things like tie their own shoes and eat for themselves and put their own clothes on and pick their own stuff up versus the shame and doubt when they're presented with a task that they can see their other peers able to do that they can't. And this is basic stuff. This is Maslow's first hierarchy. This is they feel safe. This is they are fed. This is they're in a safe environment. They have shelter. This is baseline. And a little bit of numeracy, like I described before, and a little bit of literacy, and then some stories that you read to them so that they learn about good characters is really everything that's going on. There's really nothing else going on.
And the reason in my opinion, that there is a lower literacy rate in public schools is because they're learning from their peers how to behave, which is not always for the best, especially in a school setting. They don't have the ability to control themselves. For example, if they're starving, they can't run to the refrigerator and eat. If they have to go to the bathroom, they may not even be allowed to go to the bathroom. So they don't have any control over their environment, and they don't have people that they can trust, and they don't have people that they can look up to and learn how to behave. And because of all that, they're not focused on learning to read. They're focused on, can I go to the bathroom? Can I eat? When am I going to eat? How do I behave in this situation? Look at how little Johnny is behaving. I think I'll behave that way. That looks like the best way. And that's what they're learning rather than how to read.
My personal favorite is I can't wait for recess.
Yes. Homeschool proper schedule. What I'm saying is 8 hours a day recess, 38 minutes a day. No, not 8 hours a day recess. 8 hours a day child labor and indentured servitude to clean the house. 1 hour of recess. Sorry, I'm kidding. Actually, I'm kind of not kidding. I think Queen Bee knows that I'm not kidding.
It wouldn't take 8 hours of indentured servitude, but a couple hours, we'd have a pretty darn clean house. So yes.
See? Okay. That is stage one. Stage one is they're mostly just sensory motor little apes, and they need tiny amount of gentle prompting for things like numeracy and literacy. They're mostly learning their cooperative behavior and social structure, and they should be in an environment where they feel safe, where they feel sheltered, where they feel loved and appreciated. And if they need to go to the bathroom, I don't even know why that's a question, or if they just happen to be hungry, they should be able to get food. It makes way more sense than them being in a full-time job at the federal penitentiary box down at the end of the street. Okay, we'll move on. Stage two. Stage two is the first stage where you're going to be pushing them in a certain way, but most people think that what I mean by that is that it's going to be academics. And I'm happy to report it will, again, not be focused on academics. It will be focused on something else. In this stage, this is based on the phrase that Socrates says in part of those 2 pages inside Plato's The Republic. He says, no learning under coercion has any hold on the mind. Meaning, if they're not interested in learning something, then even, quote, if you were successful in, quote, learning something, it won't hold. It won't last, and it won't matter. And then he says another thing. He says you should not bother trying to discipline them deeply in their mind before they are disciplined in their body. So in this stage, I call it the gymnasium stage. It's discipline over the body. They should have respect for themselves. They should have respect for others. They should be way past the childish, not getting along. They should have developed some kind of presence of emotional stability when they lose, is a good example. And they can begin to understand some concrete operational thought. That's Piagetian. Erickson would call this mastering of certain competencies, building self-esteem, especially when well-guided, the ability to do certain things. And this is not worksheets do. This is do like cook or clean or mow the lawn or play a musical instrument or becoming decent at a sport. You guys want to try a couple of anyone?
Operate heavy machinery.
Fine.
Learn how to do work with anything with their hands, building things and
yeah, maybe like dig a hole out back and build a fence. All that makes sense. You were kind of joking with operating heavy machinery, but didn't you recently see this video of the kid that was running the tractor on the farm? And he was like, what, 7, 8, 9? He couldn't have been 10. And he was just out there loving it. He was killing it. But yes, this is the phase where you're establishing between, so sorry, again, the ages here is between about age 8 till about age 12. You're establishing a recognition as an adult that this child has some self-restraint. They have some self-control. They can use their hands to do things that they're okay at, that they're good at, that they like doing. And when you interact with them, they're friendly and they're talkative and they can communicate and they're, I don't mean that everyone has to be talkative and, chatty, but they have some discipline over their behavior. And I'm not saying we should have the kids in actual weightlifting gyms, although I'm not necessarily against it. Mostly it's about they should be doing track and field. They should be running around. They should be climbing up stuff. There's this great, like a short film on YouTube. Maybe I'll find it. We'll post to it or post a link to it. And there's like a bunch of 12, 13, 14, like middle school boys. And they're doing gymnastics like you would not believe. They're jumping through stuff. They're jumping over stuff. They're jumping over each other. They're doing flips and tumbles. And they look like they are absolutely having a ball. And it is the evidence of years of training and years of, being diligent to a kind of rigorous, work at something that wasn't worksheets. It was releasing your wiggles. It was moving around. It was gymnastics of sorts. And I think gymnastics and dance is a pretty classic example of something that you could have young children doing that is really healthy for their mind because they're establishing a certain kind of ability over their body that will be useful for the rest of their life. And it's showing up here in this stage 2 between ages 8 and 12. And we're not even at the academics yet. I mean, they're going to be able to read much deeper things, right? They're going to be able to get into more math if you want to, more science if you want to. Just exposing them to those things is good enough. I'm going to add a couple things, but do you guys have anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I was thinking about abstract thinking, which doesn't even kids can't really even do abstract thinking until how old? Maybe 12 or so when they start being able to think abstractly.
That's why even the
Um,
number 12 is a good number because for some kids it might be 9, 10, and for other kids it might be
right.
12, 13, 14, so 12-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important not to expect them to understand these completely arbitrary, not arbitrary, but abstract thoughts
Hmm.
like higher level mathematics, anything that they can't, manipulate and see what's going on. Algebra isn't something you should teach under the age of 12, in my opinion, because it's higher level and it's very abstract. And history is the same for me. I never really got history till I was in later teens. I knew it, but it just seemed so far off that it wasn't applicable. So it wasn't till like later teens for me that I was like, oh, actually it's kind of interesting and important for me, I think. Just that abstract thinking, because kids are learning about the world around them, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about how to interact with the world and how to dominate the world, honestly,
Yep.
their own world, and they have to learn how to dominate their own world before they can venture out into other spheres.
You're using a word that Erickson would say industry, so being
Yep,
useful. And when you
yep,
describe the contrast between abstract thinking, it's anything taught that is logical or abstracted should be concretized. So if it's going to be math, it's
right.
going to be math about distances or math about, the number of planks you're going to need to build this fence, or the math about how long does it take to dig a hole, or the math about recipes is a great math, exercise in how much you need of this and how much you need of that and how long it takes to cook things and stuff like that. Meaning, they should have some competence through some success in tasks, and what they learn in any kind of an abstract way will be based on those concrete tasks and concrete actions that they're taking. Piaget would say the increasing use of logical operations in concrete contexts. And I think Erickson would call that industry, but Erickson would be pointing out industry versus inferiority.
Right.
And a lot of kids hit ages 10 and 11, 12 when they could be doing a little more logical or abstract thinking, but they have not used their body or their hands to do concrete things. And it's difficult for them to then start thinking abstractly because they haven't done these things yet. And Erickson calls that inferiority. And especially when they feel that sense of contrast between them and their peers, that can be a big problem that sets up some of the big problems we see in public education for middle schoolers. Would you agree with that?
I would. That's really interesting. So I have middle schoolers, two girls and one boy, and so it's interesting phenomena to watch. But how have you noticed that in middle schoolers, being that you were a middle school teacher?
Yeah, I think it really is just that. Especially, I mean, they're in my head right now. I'm seeing them in my class, whether they're smiling at me or not. Most of them weren't. Some of them were just really better looking than others, and some of them were a little bit bigger than others. This is when their bodies are changing, and so some of them are still, 4 foot tall mites, and some of them are starting to get 5 foot, 5.5, and one of them was almost tall as me. But even the one that was pretty tall, it's like the only thing he's ever done was basketball. Like he'd never built anything. He'd never. Look, okay, I'm tooting my own horn a little bit. I had an uncle who was into construction. And so like when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, I'd paved concrete, like a little bit of road, like a driveway. I'd built a fence. I'd built stairs. Uh, my grandfather owned a chemistry lab, and when we were in our, 11, 12, 13, 14 age, uh, going over to grandma and grandpa's house in the summer, like half the time we'd go to work with him in the morning to his chemistry lab, and he wouldn't just have us mop the floors. He'd have us try some of his, chemical analyses. And there were some things that I was better at than the people he was paying to do those jobs. And so just being able to do tasks. And I think about these kids and it's like, you were never allowed to be really good at anything. The only thing these kids have done is played a bunch of video games, and they're very good at them too. I don't want to, belittle some of that because some of them are very, very good at it. But it's like with your hands in the real world, in the concrete world, like what have you done? And the answer was so little. And to me, that played itself out in a big, massive sense of inferiority. They just did not, they were not happy with themselves. They were not proud of themselves. They were not stable in themselves. Does that help?
Yeah, and did you see a difference between girls and boys? And like
Certainly.
in what they did, or
It was in the difference of what I just described. No, for the girls or boys, it was the same. The same thing was, have you used your hands to do something that you're good at? And with most girls by age 5, 6, 7, hopefully it's drawing and arranging little scenes with your dolls, and some of it may be dancing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's okay. But by age 12, if it's still drawing and arranging scenes with your dolls and or video games, it's sorry. No, it should be things like, can you make anything? Can you play an instrument? Can you, I mean, I don't want to say that everything has to be about cooking for girls, but like by the time my girls are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I'm hoping they're doing most of the cooking in the kitchen. And that's an actual thing that you do with your hands that accomplishes something that is good for your family. And so to a lot of these kids, I don't see any of that. And so it's the same problem. And girls are developing physically a little bit faster than most boys, just on the bell curve. So they're already being touched by some changes that they should have already felt strong in their pride in themselves, their self-esteem, their ability to do things, should already have been settled before those changes. Because by those time those changes happen, then they get really disoriented if they don't have some of that experience.
for my kids, it's been instruments and archery and things like that.
Archery is
Um,
such a good one, especially for girls, because it's very military related, even though they don't want to think of it that way, and yet it is, and it's not as I don't know, maybe nitty gritty. Maybe some girls don't mind that, but girls do with archery is such a good one.
I love archery. Um,
Even for queen bees, archery is a good one.
I had a daughter that did fencing for a little bit. That
Perfect.
was pretty fun.
Okay, so then that's the second stage. We're only at the second stage. We may not get to all of this tonight, and if we don't, by the way, it's not even a big deal. Appreciate everyone's time. The third stage is when academic education actually begins. And what it is so far from stage one, you've tried to develop their moral character and their ability just to be good humans that aren't causing a bunch of problems, okay, to themselves and everyone around them. And then stage two, it's discipline over the body. They can get along, they can do some things with their own hands, um, and they have some stable sense of ability. Okay, and then you go to one of them, maybe a boy, maybe a girl, and you realize at age 11 or 12 or 13, you're like, I'm really impressed by how mature you're being compared to when you were younger. I noticed that you're getting along with people, that you're able to do a bunch of really cool things. And you ask them, what would you like? What is something you would like to study? Something you would like to know more about? And the third stage is based on Plato saying, let the earliest form of education be a form of amusement, so that what they learn is based on their interest. And as I mentioned before, because everything you learn under coercion has no hold on the mind, even if you wanted it to. And then you also find out what the child's natural bent is. And you don't refuse any answer that they give. If I had given that answer at age 12, it would have been, I would have wanted to know about cars and car engines. And what you do is you get them on YouTube, because there's amazing car machinery and mechanics stuff to study on YouTube. You get them a Motor Trend magazine with a bunch of cool cars and, stats for 0 to 60 times. And you get to this point where, because they have discipline over their body, they should be able to attend to certain tasks, and they should be able to attend to thinking about things for themselves. Queen Bee, you have a really good way of putting this, and we're going to talk about it.
I
You,
do.
yeah, you always say to geek out. This is when they get to geek
Oh,
out.
oh yeah, this is when they get to geek out. You're right. This is when my family really thrived. My youngest brother, he was kind of a wild cannon. He was the youngest, and so he was kind of just wild. And there came a point when he was about 13 that he decided that he wanted to know everything he could learn about math. It started because he wanted to go to a public high school. And anyways, long story, even longer. He went to he did go to public school, found out that they didn't have enough for math for him, so got out, did a correspondence school through a college, got through a couple more courses, went back into public school, petitioned for calculus for him and a friend, and they gave it to him. And then he went into college and majored in physics and math, dual major, and worked for NASA, and then NASA paid for his graduate degree. That was all because my parents just let him geek out. When he was, I think, about 12, he decided he was going to start tearing apart computers and putting them back together.
Such a good idea.
And my dad said, I think it was like 5 of them that he tore apart and put back together. And the very first one, it was early in my dad's business. They didn't really have the money for buying a new computer, and it was a little nerve-wracking, but he got it back together and he did well at it. And now that's what he does for a living. And so, yeah, my family, yeah, we all love to geek out. It's pretty annoying at times, actually. But yeah, this is the age where they really go in depth, and it's really fun to watch. Even if it's something you're not interested in, it's really fun to watch them just eat it up. And it doesn't really even have to be anything like math or physics. It was for my one brother, but it can be something that you think is silly and isn't going to lead them anywhere. The point is not what it is that they're geeking out on. The point is that they're learning how to geek out on something, how to apply themselves to something and learn it to the nth degree. I envision it like a tunnel, and they're just going down that tunnel as far as they possibly can go, and learning how to go down that tunnel and what else they need to do. Learning that there's some things, if they really want to go all the way down that tunnel, there's things that they're going to have to learn that they're probably not going to be super interested in, but it's going to get them to their destination. And so this is the age when they start doing that, and it's just a really exciting age, in my opinion.
And that is so the opposite of what everyone thinks about this age. And this is why. The reason is because even when they were younger, they were not given ways to be successful. Second, they did not, concretize the ability to be competent with their body and with their own behavior and have some stability in what they're good at and things that they like. So that now you just give them time and space to geek out. You give them time and space to dive into something that they actually like. And just like you said, it can change. It doesn't have to be the same thing. It could even be for less than a season. But if there are 4 seasons a year and they did 4 things that year when they're 12 or 13, what did it matter? Like, did it stunt their abilities? Did it ruin their chances for a good job, in their 30s? And the answer is no, it's the opposite. It's now's the time to figure out what they're willing to geek out about, and then get into the geeking out of something and come up upon those roadblocks you just described, those little speed bumps where it's like, okay, if I wanted to actually understand this more, I've got to do at least a little bit of learning of some stuff that I don't necessarily like, but it is important for this understanding. And that experience of being able to overcome that resistance themselves is everything. And it doesn't matter what they're getting super into. It's exactly right. It could be anything. And at first, listen, if at first it's video games, then let it be video games. Okay, just get over it. You'll be fine. Everyone will be fine. And some of the things from the previous stages don't go away. And in fact, you want to increase how much they're using their body. So I'm definitely thinking about little boys for sure. But believe me, I am also definitely thinking about little girls. They need to be using their body and releasing their wiggles for a huge portion of every day so that they will have the stability and patience and calm to be in a room geeking out about something. That's a really big feature that is completely missed in middle school, and probably why most middle school students and most people think of middle school age as being so troublesome. The truth is, I asked this of almost every parent that I had a one-on-one conversation about a student that was having a hard time, especially if that student was a boy. I asked them this question, which I probably shouldn't have even asked. Okay. I asked them a question. It's not obvious that they really even want to study this subject. And I just have a funny question. If I sent your son home every day from school, having had lunch, and was super tired and sweaty most days of the week because I just had him do sports, or I had him do chores, or I had him do outdoor activities or something, and he just came home tired and sweaty, would that bother you? Not one parent ever said, "Oh, I would not be okay with that." Every single one of them were like, "Yeah, that'd be great." Do you know why? Because that's what they should be doing. They should be doing that so that they are able to sit in a room for a little while and geek out about stuff with their mind, because their mind now is able to geek out about things at least a first level of depth. And if you never get settled long enough, you never have that experience. You never get into those things that interest you. And this is where it's supposed to start. And this is actually a fun stage, not the way that we think of it, even though it's complicated and difficult for parents, and so be it. But this would make it a lot easier. Anyone disagree with that?
No, that's absolutely true. And if we go through all those stages in order and have this mindset, it makes it so much easier on the parent and so much easier on the child. And in the end, they get to the point where they can geek out on something completely, and that is education. Like that is
Yeah.
actually like that right there is education. They've learned how to learn and they can do anything at this point. I mean, they can get at whatever advanced degree they want because they have learned how to learn.
That is actually the fourth stage, which we're not even going to bother discussing, because the first three stages to me are the main things that most parents need to be aware of. We'll discuss that further, which is what you just said, because after they do this with one subject, they can do it with any subject because they have the mental discipline to be able to do that. But up to this point, I love what you just said, because it really is should be a huge relief off of the parents and the child's shoulders. It is not about finishing this worksheet before you leave today. It is not about finishing this part of the curriculum by the end of the week. It's about going through these stages at the normal pace of life, at the speed of life, which is slow. And the burden is a long-term burden, not a in the moment pressured day by day, minute by minute burden, which is definitely what children experience in the education system, right?
Right. And the idea, Bowtied Water Bear often says, and we talk about this often, we're not raising children, we're raising adults.
Yes.
And if the idea is to raise an adult, then the end goal is for them to know how to educate themselves and for them to be interested in things enough to educate themselves. And that's literally the end goal. So when you go into homeschooling with this in mind, with I'm educating adults to educate themselves, it is, and going through the steps as you described them, it's immensely easier than people make it out to be, and immensely easier than the public school system makes it out to be, or even the private school system. It's a lot easier than they make it out to be.
The closest of these quote systems or plans that are out there is probably the Montessori schools, and I applaud their view of this exact problem, which is it's not about each grade, it's about the long-term game. So I believe they approach that better than almost anyone. But
Agree.
yeah, and so just to add on top of that, you guys are, if you're in our spaces, you'll meet the Prescotts, Homeschool Life LLC. They're out there on X. They're really wonderful people. They wrote a book called Kids Don't Need School, and that means kids don't need school and they don't need teachers. You know why? Because school can be done whenever they're ready to teach themselves. You want to train them to become people who can teach themselves anything, and they're not going to do that at age 7, so don't try. And they're not going to do that at age 12, so don't try. You want to get them set up as good people up until the ages of 10, 11, 12, and then you start leaning into their ability to do that for something that actually interests in themselves, and they become someone that can teach themselves. And some of it may be things like some of the numeracy in the early years, some of the literacy in the early years may require some diligent work on their own to teach themselves, and that's fine. But that's like 15, 20 minute stuff. That's not 2 hours. That's not 5 hours a day. It's nothing like that. It's very minimal. But by the time they're 12, they need to know that they can do that.
I think I think what's done the most disservice, in my opinion at least, when I remember thinking as a kid, well, I guess I can't play the violin because I didn't start when I was 2 years old, like some of
Mm,
these kids I see, these virtuoso children. I remember thinking that when I was in third grade. And then I decided I was going to play the violin and I pursued that as far as I wanted to. And then I still kind of play, but I'm not great. But I think that has done the biggest disservice. People want to find the best program, the best whatever for their kid by the age of I I saw a documentary one time a long time ago about people trying to get their kids into the best kindergartens because if they didn't get their kids into the best kindergartens, they wouldn't get into the best schools, which means they wouldn't get into the best colleges.
That
And
may
I
be
thought,
true. That may actually be true. That's a joke in a movie from the 80s. What was it called? It was called
I-
Baby Boom. It was a joke. It was like she was out at the playground with other moms and their kids were there, and they were talking about the way you just did, but it was being presented as a joke. Like no one actually thinks that way about their 5-month-old baby, do they? Really?
I hope not. It scared me when I saw that. It just floored me. It was a documentary though. It was people in New York and they were fighting over kindergartens and it floored me. I don't know what the documentary was called. I don't even know if I could find it again. But it's just the thought is awful and I think that's what people are afraid of. Well, I better teach my 5-year-old. The thing is, they're not developmentally capable of understanding that type of thing. So, I mean, you might get a rudimentary idea in them and they might be able to regurgitate facts, but are they really learning it? No. And if they
Hmm.
get to the age of, 17 and they decide they want to learn that, they can learn at an expedited rate. And I don't think people understand that because they're so enamored with these virtuoso 5-year-olds playing violin on the television that, oh, we better get little Susie in to play the violin. And it's done such a disservice. Kids need the freedom to figure out what their bent is and to pursue it all the way down that tunnel.
And let's just say this because this is supposed to suit whatever anyone wants to do at home with their children. Look, if you started them on the violin when they were 2.5 and they become the next Yo-Yo Ma for violins, great, fine. And I don't even care if they can do math. Look, if you want your child to be something like that when they're an adult and you start them that early, look, I don't know about that early and they get disenchanted by, the way that they were brought up compared to other children. Those are all questions for the parents. I'm not going to speculate or moralize about what someone should do there. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The school system is like, yeah, but they didn't know calculus. And I'm like, he's the best violinist on the planet. He's the Yo-Yo Ma of violins. Who cares if they can do calculus? And that is a very important way to think as a parent when you're thinking about how to make a successful child. And I just want to wrap that around to what you just said, which is exactly right. The expeditious learning in the fourth stage, which we didn't discuss deeply, which we can talk about some other time. I mean, it's coming soon, we will, is once you've established a decent humanity from ages 4 to 8, once you've established discipline over the body from 8 to 12, once you've geeked out on something and you know how to study something for yourself to learn it from 12 to maybe 15, from 15 to 18, you can learn everything that they expect you to learn from what is considered K through 12 learning in no time. You are ready to do it. Your mind can take it and you can do it. It's not a problem. You can teach it to yourself. You will probably finish first or second year college level classes in that time frame because now you can sit down and do the work.
Yes, I concur. I completely agree with that. That's the entire foundation of teaching. That's the entire idea of homeschooling. And you don't need to have a master's degree in rocket science and a PhD in brain chemistry to teach your child that or
No,
to provide the
right.
environment for them to learn.
That's exactly right. In fact, that's a big part of this is that we did not say one thing that the parent needs to be doing on behalf of the child's serious academic endeavor, did we? Not once. That's not what's going on here.
Right.
We're going to call it for this session, which is really great. We're going to probably want to bring up a couple things here at the close, but is there any parting remarks you'd like to add? I've kind of been talking the whole time, but appreciate everyone's being around to listen.
No, it's been really encouraging. I love the way you have it lined out, diagrammed. Gives a good framework for adding things into homeschooling. And I really appreciate the way that you've thought this through.
Definitely. Thank you. For me, it all boiled down to these 2 pages of Plato's Republic from Socrates. And again, I don't know if you can tell, I am not some kind of master of pedagogy. I'm not a perfect teacher. I am not a world-renowned teacher or a person who's taught so many thousands of kids and successfully. No, no, no. I read these couple of pages and there's so much wisdom that you can draw out of them for how to approach doing this as an adult, as a parent with your children. And so to me, it makes the endeavor that much more fun. that much more doable, more achievable. And so we will discuss the fourth stage coming soon. We hope to see everyone at our X Spaces every Wednesday. That's 1900 or 7 p.m. Eastern Time on X. Check it out at Bowtied Queen Bee. She will be the one to post the link. Quick shout out to our Sober Dad Pod. We really love him being around. He's such a great host. John with at Sober Dad Pod, and myself at Uncle Owl on X. You can send us DMs anytime, all day long. Yes, Queen Bee?
Please do. I love answering DMs.
Send us DMs with your questions. We'll get back to you, including if you have questions that you want us to discuss during our spaces, we can do that too. You can always send us an email as well at HNN email, which is the hiveandnestpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Proton Mail, hiveandnest@pm.me. We're going to link everything, of course, in our description and anywhere you're picking this up, the podcast or on X. And we just want to wrap it up by saying thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks, Uncle Owl.
For sure.
Wow, that was such a good episode. I slept through the whole thing. I'm just kidding. I had some family things to attend to, and Uncle Owl and Her Majesty were kind enough to do the send-off for me, so I don't really have a whole lot to say other than thank you for listening, and I recommend you go back and listen to this more than once, because like you said, you gotta chew on it, and much like a cow, you chew, you swallow, and you do some more chewing. That's what I'm gonna do for sure. But in the meantime, please remember to like, share, subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this, and until next time, bye.